look at tonight is one of the main effects of trauma is that trauma affects the way we cope with life. And you may not have thought a lot about this, but hopefully by the end of the night, you'll realize that complex trauma sets a child up and sets up to become adults who don't have very good coping skills. And I hope to kind of define that and explain that for you tonight, and hopefully it will give you a lot of insight. So let me begin with this. Coping is something that we have to learn. We just aren't born having a sense of how to cope with life. It is something that is taught to us. So if you picture yourself as a child and you're feeling scared or you're feeling panicky, what a parent in a healthy situation would do is to say with you, sit down with you and say, I know you're feeling this way. Let me tell you what you need to do here. And they would comfort you. They would teach you. They would give you some tools to use to help you handle the situation. And so the next time that situation came up, you wouldn't panic because you would go, I know what to do. So you learned a coping skill. And through childhood, you would gradually assemble a toolkit that had more and more stuff that would enable you to handle stress and all kinds of difficult situations. That's the ideal. That's in a healthy home. But sadly, that isn't what happens in the home where there's complex trauma. Because the complex trauma is being inflicted by, usually, the participants in the home. And so instead of teaching you how to deal with the trauma, they're inflicting trauma on you and not helping you cope with it. Rather, they're saying, get over it, quit being a suck, etc., etc. And so you then begin to go the fight, flight, freeze, and other coping mechanisms. And that's what we're going to look at today. So what then happens in a child where there's complex trauma is their focus is, how do I survive? And then what do I do to get some of my needs met? And what happens is, in survival mode, the child picks what they think will help them survive and get their needs met, and it seems to work. They seem to have come across the perfect solution, and so they begin to do it, and they keep doing it, and it seems to be giving good results until you get into your teens, your late teens, into adult life, and you begin to find out that the coping skills that I thought were helping me are actually making my life worse. And instead of protecting me from getting hurt, they're causing me to get hurt even more. And so that is the big picture of what we're going to look at. Now I want to just flip and give you a little bit around what's going on in the brain when you face complex trauma. So if you can again think of your brain that there are two parts to it. You have the thinking part on the front, and it learns, it processes, it thinks through stuff logically, it evaluates stuff. That's the front of your brain. And then in the center of the brain, we have what is known as the limbic system, which is the doing part. It's the part that when you get kind of in a place of being afraid, you go fight, flight. That's the limbic part happening. Okay, so here's how this works. If you take what I just told you at the beginning about a child being afraid, what will happen with that child is you have this limbic part that when you see danger, it becomes aroused. It becomes alert. It is kind of alarm system goes off and says, danger, danger. What happens when the parent sits down with the child and says, you know what, you don't need to be afraid, and they help the child think it through, is they engage the front part of your brain and help you process the scary situation. And so as you learn and as you think your way through it, what happens is that limbic system, the doing part, relaxes. And then the next time you face that danger and the limbic system begins to get the alarm system, the front part kicks in and says, no, I got this covered. You can relax. I know what to do. Okay? In the case of extreme danger, the brain, that limbic system says, this is really scary. This is really dangerous. What it then does is shuts down the front part of the brain. Says, I'm not listening to you because I don't got time to think this through. This is so dangerous, I got to act now. And so the limbic system takes over and shuts down that front part of the brain, and you go fight, flight, and you go into action. Okay. Now take that to growing up in complex trauma. So instead of your parents responding when that limbic system is aroused and the alarm bells go off, nobody helps you cope. And so what does your brain begin to do? Your brain begins to see all dangerous situations as extremely dangerous situations. And so instead of even thinking about the situation and possible solutions, that part gets ignored and shut down, and the limbic part takes over, and it goes into fight or flight. And so what is the sad reality for kids that grow up in complex trauma is they have this overactive limbic system that doesn't have a front part of the brain that can help them process the danger around them. And so as soon as they smell danger, fight, flight kicks in a nanosecond, and no thinking happens at all. And that's kind of what's going on in the brain. Now let me take that further to now you're in a recovery situation. You're aware that you have trauma. What do you do with that now? So let me back up to this diagram. The bottom line is that original brain circuit. So as you face danger, which is the trigger that says alarm bells go off, we are in danger, you fight, flight, and you build a brain circuit. So as soon as you smell that kind of danger, this circuit fires immediately and it goes to fight and flight. Okay? You come into recovery now and say, I have to change that. I can't be numbing and avoiding every time I'm feeling anxiety or fear. And so you try then to build a new circuit on top of that old one. So when you feel a trigger, the old you says fight, flight, but you say, hang on, and you got about a nanosecond to respond. But you successfully respond and say, I'm not going to run away, and I'm not going to get angry and fight. I am going, and you start to do new responses. You get the front of your brain engaged, and you begin to learn other ways of handling it. So you assemble a toolbox. So that's what you're doing as you begin to try and deal with complex trauma, is you begin building new brain circuits. But those are tough to build. Now here's what happens for many, many people. You'll be building these new circuits, so you'll get trauma, or you'll get reminders of trauma, you'll get new experiences that feel like danger, and you'll get pretty good at saying, you know what, I can handle this now. I can handle this. And you go, and the new responses, and life is going good. Here's a little thing we're learning about the brain. Let's say you get a whole bunch of bad day situations in one day. So you get fired from your job, you come home and your dog's dead, your wife is mad at you and threatening to divorce you, and all of a sudden you're going, danger, 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 and guess what your brain does? It says, I can't depend on these new circuits because this is extreme danger. I'm going back to the most reliable circuit. And that's where a person all of a sudden does something stupid and they go, what was that all about? And that is because as stress goes up and it gets to a certain point, the brain says, time to go back to old Mr. Reliable. So just be aware of that. Now, if you're an addict, let me just translate that for you. If you look at that bottom line, that old circuit, just change the trauma piece. And let's say you put in AA's HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So let's say you're lonely, that's your trigger. In the past, you would say, I'm lonely, so I am going to, and it usually would end up at drugs or alcohol, okay? So now you come into recovery, I should say you've reinforced that circuit 1,000 times. You come into recovery and you say, I'm lonely, I am going to phone somebody, I'm going to go to a meeting, and you build a new circuit on top of that. And you do really well. And you're quite proud of yourself, and you should be. Then you lose your job, you come home, your dog's dead, and your wife's mad at you and threatening divorce, and you go, stress is away. What does the brain do? It goes back to that old circuit that says, I think I need a drink, I think I need to pick up, and you relapse. And so what we again know is that for stress, for people coming from complex trauma, especially with those in addiction, when stress gets to a certain point, it takes them back to the old circuit, which is not just fight or flight, but for the addict, it's back to a relapse. Big issue. Okay, let me just say a couple things now. We are going to look at 50 characteristics that happen to children who grow up in complex trauma. You didn't know that many things were wrong with you, did you? These 50 characteristics that kids that grow up in a healthy home, they don't have a problem with. And so by the end of this, we're not going to get through all 50 tonight, let me assure you of that. But by the end of this, you're going to feel more and more screwed up as this series goes along. And that's the point, is for the first time, hopefully, you can begin to say, you know what? My food isn't the problem. My drugs aren't the problem. I'm the problem, and I got to deal with this trauma stuff. Because it not only set me up for addiction, it set me up for all kinds of things that end up in self-destruction. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. And again, let me add something to you who are addicts. What you'll find as we go through these 50 characteristics of complex trauma is that those 50 characteristics actually become relapse warning signs. And so if you had these complex trauma and ended up in addiction, part of your addiction probably was doing a lot of these 50 things. And what those became your addictive behaviors. And so if you're in relapse mode, you will begin to do these 50 characteristics probably before you pick up the drug. And so they are great little warning signs when you're heading down the wrong road. Now, some of you might want to very secretively check off all of the ones that characterize you. And if you get all 50, you get a gold star, and we'll put your picture on the wall. No, we won't. But tonight we're going to get through 17 characteristics that make it difficult for a person from complex trauma to cope well. And so all of the 17 we're going to look at tonight are about coping, and then next week we're going to look at more that also are about coping. So what you begin to realize is complex trauma does a whole bunch of things inside of you that messes up coping well. Okay, so the first one, and I've already referred to it, people out of complex trauma do not handle stress well. Stress is something that is just a huge issue that can lead to relapse, that can lead to bad behaviors from the past. And so stress sends off that alarm system, and often, if you want another way to say it, it reawakens the trauma. And so I put up here some of the common things that cause stress that send this alarm system off and reawaken trauma. So one of the most common ones is if you are in a position and all of a sudden you feel out of control, that you are powerless to affect the situation. That sends you into trauma mode because I might get hurt, and that's stress, and you don't do well with that. or if you're overwhelmed. And that is, you just have so much on your plate, so many responsibilities, so many things going wrong. How can I cope with it all? Stress. Feelings of vulnerability. For many people, when you were vulnerable, when you expressed emotions, when you shared some very personal stuff, you got hurt. And so as soon as you're in a position where you go, oh, I bet you I shouldn't have said that, or oh, I just cried, oh, what's everybody thinking of me? That creates a lot of stress. If you are feeling threatened or attacked, if somebody is intimidating, if somebody is in your space and close to you, or somebody is angry or raises their voice with you, trauma gets triggered by that, and that therefore includes conflict and relationships. If you're in a fight, conflict, a big stress trigger, next one, separation or loss. All of a sudden, something that was in your life, which was very important to you, is out of your life. Causes great stress, reawakens trauma, because you're feeling abandoned again. Part of that is loneliness, because you begin to go through all that shame, nobody loves me, I must not be lovable, and all of the stress, and will I die this way, etc. Transitions, changes, create a lot of stress and disruptions from the normal routine or schedule, and then reminders of past events. Now let me just say this about these things. If you come from complex trauma, you're probably very aware that if somebody comes up behind you and taps you on the shoulder, you kind of react. And they're probably lucky if they don't get punched, because that's the reflex in you, okay? For many of you, it's probably even greater than that and beyond that. For a lot of people coming out of trauma, huge anxiety disorders, difficulty focusing on a particular topic, but you may have trouble sleeping. Many of the people I deal with have always slept with a weapon close to their bed, either in their bedside table, under their pillow. Many never sleep with their back to the door. They always sleep with their back to the wall. Many never allow themselves to go into a deep sleep. They keep themselves in a shallow sleep. That's all trauma-related stuff. Some need to self-soothe themselves to help them go to sleep at night. And you will get grown men that still rock themselves in bed to try and soothe themselves and calm themselves down. All kinds of that stuff comes out of trauma, and when that trauma is kind of reawakened through stress, it just gets accented, magnified even more. Okay, second characteristic that comes out of trauma, and I refer to it, but fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of failure. What you're going to see is that what comes out of trauma is a lot of fear running your life. But there's fear of change and fear of the unknown. Why? Because if I go into a new situation, the unknown, which is brought about by change, and I don't know how to handle it because it's all new to me, I could get hurt. And so what I see all the time is that when people finish treatment or they get a new job, all of a sudden there's this panic thing because I'm now entering change in the unknown, and it's a scary thing. And so we'll look at it in a minute what you do. But what many people do is this. I would rather stay in an unhealthy, abusive situation than change and leave it. Why? Because at least I know what to expect here, and I kind of know how to handle it. But if I go into a new situation, can you guarantee to me that I'll never go through painful stuff again? Oh, you can't guarantee it? Okay, I'll stay here. And so that is how people respond. And so in order to try and protect themselves from getting hurt, do you see what you're doing? You're setting yourself up to get hurt even more. And that's what we're going to see over and over again. There's a subtle thing that comes out of this whole fear thing for many people, and it's fear of success. You may have that. And what it is is if you could consider that a kid coming out of trauma, they haven't had a lot of successes necessarily in life. They've had a lot of pain, they've had a lot of emptiness, but not a lot of good stuff happening regularly. And so what begins to happen when they get into a situation where things are really going well, they're having success, they get really afraid. Because what they're afraid of is, I'm going to blow it because I've never been this successful this long before, or the other shoe is going to drop. And many kids that come out of dysfunction where there was abuse would come home from school and you would be listening for how dad sounded as he came in the door. You could probably tell by the way he closed the door, whether he was angry or not, whether he's in a good mood or not. You could tell by the tone of his voice. And if you went for 2 or 3 days where dad came home happy, you got nervous because the other shoe was about to drop. And you were pretty certain you're going to have a very bad day in the very near future. So that leads to the fourth thing that comes out of trauma, and that is when things are going well or when there's change and the unknown, you go, I'll just sabotage it. I will destroy it so I'm back to what I know is familiar. And it could be a good job, it could be recovery, it could be a good relationship, but you just sabotage whenever things are starting to look up. Now let me explain that with the fifth thing. People who come out of trauma have a very conflicted relationship with hope. They long to have hope, but they're afraid to get their hopes up. So I put a little line there with these bumps in it. So let me explain it. If you grew up in a home of complex trauma, what you probably concluded is what we said last week, that the reason dad is mad at me, the reason dad is neglecting me is because I'm doing something wrong. Okay? So the line that's going up at kind of a 45-degree angle there is the child that says, what I need to do is try harder. And so they're trying harder. I'm going to do extra chores. I'm going to make breakfast for dad. I'm going to bring him his newspaper. I'm going to do everything I can to be a better child. And then dad won't get angry at me as much. Okay, so they start to do that. And dad is nice. And so that line on the 45-degree angle is their hope. They're starting to get their hope up, saying, wow, maybe dad and I can have a good relationship now. Maybe I'll be accepted and loved finally now. I'm getting my hopes up, and then you hit the top, and dad gets angry at you, and he abuses you, and your hopes come crashing down. Now, two things are happening there. You're getting hurt in two ways. Number one, you're getting hurt by the abuse, but secondly, there's an emotional pain of having your hopes dashed. And that's a painful thing as well. Okay, but a little child is going to then interpret dad getting angry, saying, I guess I'm still not doing something right. So I'm going to try harder. And so they try harder, and they try to be perfect, and they try to always be happy, and they try to never burden dad with their problems. And they're always quiet when they're around dad. And dad's nice to them, and they start getting their hopes up. And then dad abuses them, and their hopes crash. Okay, so you can just imagine that cycle over and over and over again in a child. One day, when things are going good, and they're trying to please dad, and things are going good, and they're starting to get their hopes up, they're going, don't get your hopes up. Because not only will you get abuse, you will have your hopes dashed one more time. And it hurts like crazy to get your hopes up and then have them dashed. So what the child will do when the hope starts to grow is say, let's sabotage it, because it's too painful. Now let me just, again, for those who are in addiction, if you look at that very same graph and you only apply it to getting your hopes up about recovery, And so you're doing well, you're working the steps, you're going to meetings, etc., and you're staying sober, you get your hopes up, then you relapse. And then you say, I got to try harder, I got to give this another chance, and you go back at it, and you're trying harder, and you're doing well, and you get some months of clean time, and you get your hopes up, and then you relapse. You want to know what's going to happen after a while of doing that? You start doing well in recovery, and you go, don't get your hopes up. This will hurt. If you blow it again, you know what? Let's just relapse now and get it over with. And so what happens for many people coming out of trauma is they desperately long for hope, but their hope's been dashed so often they're afraid to hope. And it's a huge dilemma that sets you up for a lot of sabotaging. Okay, the next thing that happens when you come out of trauma is that you are attracted or drawn to chaos and to risky behaviors. That's just kind of epidemic. And what people who don't understand it, they say, well, if they grew up in chaos and they grew up in all kinds of pain, why now, when they're trying to stay safe, do they put themselves in chaos and in risky behaviors? That just doesn't make sense. They're going to get hurt. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but I want to give you kind of 3 reasons why that happens. If you think of relationships in dysfunction, unhealthy homes, they are great highs, great lows, or bad lows. But it's an extreme swing. Things are going great, great makeup sex, everybody's on a honeymoon, then it crashes, life sucks, everything sucks, and it's straight. Okay, what's going to happen if you get into a healthy relationship where the ups and downs are like this? You go, this doesn't feel right. Something's missing here. And so something in you is drawn back to chaos because it feels normal. That's what you're used to. It kind of feels like you're in a normal family again. And so there's that attraction. But the second thing, when you're in trauma and you have fight, flight, and that's not the option, so you freeze and you stuff all your emotions down and you say, I can't feel because that's pain and that hurts, and you stuff everything away. What happens from that, which you're not prepared for, is that life becomes dead. Life becomes boring. And what do we conclude? If you come out of that, you go, the reason life is boring is because I don't have enough excitement. You don't go, the reason life is boring is because I'm a victim of trauma and I've stuffed my emotions. You don't go there. You go, what I need is a little bit of excitement. And so people that come out of trauma who've stuffed all their emotions end up needing risky stuff in order to create some feelings, because that's how dead they are. And then the next one is, for many people that are dealing with trauma, they've got all kinds of painful emotions happening down there, and their brain is saying, okay, we're not going to run away totally, but we need something to medicate these emotions. We're not going to go to drugs or alcohol. Let's just introduce chaos. Because if I'm feeling chaos and all of the emotions of chaos, I won't feel this pain. And so that's another reason. Okay, if you've got 6 out of 6 so far, you feel right at home with everybody else that's here. Next thing that comes out of trauma is trust issues. And so what happens in trauma is the 2 people in my life that I should be able to rely totally on, mom and dad, aren't meeting my needs consistently. They can't be relied on to do that. And they're doing things that would hurt me. And so there's trust issues that are happening. And the conclusion is the only person I can depend on to meet my needs is myself. And so I can't trust anybody else. If you trust anybody else, you get hurt. And so what then happens, because you don't trust anybody else, is that you cut yourself off from all kinds of help. If I give you this illustration, if you were a little child and you were on a roof and dad was on the ground and he said, jump, I'll catch you, and you jump and he doesn't catch you, you're hurt, you're angry, and Dad says, get back up on the roof, jump again, I'll catch you this time. So you're a little kid, you get back up on the roof, you jump again, he doesn't catch you. You might be really naive and a really trusting kid, and you might keep getting up there 10, 20 times, but there's going to come a time where you go, I can't trust that. And so I'm not going to jump anymore. So let's say somebody else comes along who's totally trustworthy, and they say to you, jump, I'll catch you. What goes on in your head? You ain't got a chance, buddy. I know this game, and you're not going to get me to jump. You see what you've just done? You've cut yourself off from all kinds of help and all kinds of people, but that is the big issue. Number 8. Because you can't trust anybody, therefore I have to be in control if I can only trust myself. And so many complex trauma people end up being control freaks. And if you want another way to say it, is basically, I'm going to try to be God. And I'm going to try to control everybody around me so that I don't get hurt and so that I get my needs met. Sounds like a great idea. Problem is, nobody wants to cooperate with your plan. And so it doesn't work well. So then you go, well, if I can't totally control people, I will develop the art of manipulating people. So if I can't get my needs met by making everybody do what I want in an overt way, what I will do is I'll get my needs met with more subtle games that I'm going to play. So I'll pout, I'll give silent treatment, I'll do whatever, but I will become a master manipulator. And so most people that come out of complex trauma end up being manipulators. And that sounds great because it seems like you're getting your needs met, but after a while, people don't want to be around you, and your relationships end up being in trouble. Number 10, when you grow up and your needs aren't being met and you're in complex trauma, one of the rules of complex trauma families is don't talk. Because if you talk, you're going to get either laughed at or you're going to get punished, or it's going to get blabbed, whatever you say. So you learn to be dishonest. And many people that come out of complex trauma, and this again is kind of flabbergasting to professionals, but they lie when it's just as easy to tell the truth. One of the things that I do with clients is I just say, how many of you would have a filing cabinet in your head? And in that filing cabinet, you would have a whole bunch of filing folders. So you'd have one folder that says Tim. And what would be in that folder would be everything you've told me about your life. Then you would have a next folder that would say Charlie, and you would keep track of everything you told Charlie, and they all start smiling because they're going, man, how'd you know I had that file folder in my head and I keep track of all my stories? I go, doesn't it take a lot of energy to keep track of all of that stuff? But people continue to do it even when they know it's okay to be honest. There's still something in them that says, I better lie just so I somehow got a back door. Don't know why I need it, but I'm going to have my safety plan. So that's a big issue. Next one, authority issues. So the people that inflicted complex trauma were authority figures. Of course, you're going to have authority problems. And that's a huge issue. And sadly, in our culture today, many people in authority abuse that power and still do things that hurt you. Next one, we're flying along. Number 12, don't handle criticism well. What I always find interesting is, like we said last week, people with complex trauma end up with shame. And what is shame? You beat yourself up. I'm no good. I'm a failure. Can't do anything right. Nobody would want to be with me. I'm fat. I'm ugly, etc., etc. And then if you make a mistake and you're feeling embarrassed, tapes start playing in your head and you call yourself all kinds of names and you call yourself down and you're a pro at it. If anybody else pointed out any of those things to you, you'd be mad. You can criticize yourself, but nobody else can. You have a hypersensitivity to anything that smells like criticism. And so that becomes a problem, because what you'll find is sometimes people have very helpful feedback, constructive criticism, but you're not hearing none of it. And so you take away opportunities for growth, and you don't cope well when you're in an environment where you're giving each other feedback. Next thing that happens, when you're in complex trauma, you're saying to yourself, I need to be alert to danger. So the focus of my thinking, the focus of my eyes needs to spot what is negative. Because if I can spot negative, I can stop it from hurting me. And so you become focused on negative. Guess what that does in your coping life? You find everything that's wrong, and then you say, life sucks, why bother? And away you go. Now let me just stop again and say, do you see how these things can be relapse things? And what I see with people all the time is if they're doing well in recovery, and then all of a sudden they start to get negative about everybody, they hate the group they go to, they hate their counselor, they hate their sponsor, nothing's right, their spouse is all of a sudden a total jerk, and it's negative, and I go, whoa, this person is on the road to relapse. Because they're in that negative thing. And they could have 99% of the things in their life could be very positive, but they notice the one negative thing. And they obsess on it, and it colors their whole perspective on life. Number 14, develop an instant gratification focus. So think of it this way. If you grew up with an element of pain and with an element of abuse where you never had a whole lot of good things happen to you, and you're living in that environment, and all of a sudden you get an opportunity for something pleasurable and fun, you go grab it. Or to put it this way, if you grew up, let's say, with your dad as an alcoholic, and dad says, I want to take you guys out for ice cream today. Would you like to go out now for ice cream, or would you like to wait till after supper tonight? What do you go? We're taking it now, buddy, because you could be drunk tonight. And so the whole focus when you're in trauma is if there's immediate gratification, immediate pleasure available, take it, because you may not get another opportunity for a while. And so that sets people up to become very impulsive. You think, or you act before you think. You make decisions and you go, why did I make that decision? But that ends up being part of it. The next thing, kind of with that whole instant gratification, and it's part of the challenge in early recovery, is you come out of medicating all your emotions to keep them frozen. You come into recovery and you start to feel. You feel losses, you feel guilt, you feel pain, and your brain is saying, I don't like this. And so guess what you do? I'm going to go to a counselor who will fix it right now. Well, don't bother coming to me, because I will probably say, we're going to sit in this for a little while. And you're going to go, why? I want out of it. And I go, because you need to learn how to deal with it in healthy ways. But that is not stuff. So you could get very irritated and angry if you're made to wait for a little while. If you're made to sit in some stuff. Sometimes, and I didn't do it to be cruel, but I have clients come to me just as I'm heading home for the day. And they go, oh, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. Oh, and I go, talk to me in the morning. What? And I go, won't kill you. I'll be here tomorrow morning. We can talk about it then. And my goal was for them to realize if it wasn't instantly fixed, they would survive it. And they might even grow through it, and good stuff might come out of it, and they'd still be alive in the morning. Okay, 2 more. People coming out of complex trauma, great starters, poor finishers. I always say the best person in the world to hire is an addict for the first week. Great starters. Then it gets boring. And so it's like as long as life stays in that exciting, emotional, honeymoon type of stage, I'm good for the first week that it lasts. And that happens in relationships. That happens for many in recovery. The first part of recovery is all honeymoon, pink cloud. Wow, this is great. Then they begin to come off of that pink cloud and they go, this is work. Oh, I'm not sure I like this stuff anymore. Great starters, poor finishers, trouble persevering. And the last one we're going to talk about tonight is what comes out of all of this stuff is a child coming out of complex trauma says, treat me with respect, treat me like an adult, but let me act like a kid. What I hope you see from this is complex trauma sets you on a course that makes it so you don't cope with life very well. And you end up making more pain when you're trying to make less pain by the coping strategy.